Okay, so 9:02, we can get started. As always, we're recording. This will be posted online for posterity. Show my kids what I actually do.
Well, that's what did you do in the pandemic, Daddy?
Yes, I hid out in the basement and and talked on the computer. So we don't have huge announcements. The budget season is upon us, which means that Liz and I will be spending some time maybe this weekend looking at amendments and seeing if anything is proposed or affects waste site cleanup related stuff. This is an annual event that seems to happen 3 or 4 times a year. So that gives us something interesting to look forward to the rest of the week. We have a question from.
I was going to say, do you have any sense of how that's looking? Do you think there are going to be any major changes in your budget?
I believe it's looking pretty good for DEP in that I think they're looking at level funding for the remainder of this year, and then we actually have like 2 budget seasons back to back now, because not only are we trying to finish out, we meaning the legislature is trying to kind of put in place the budget for the rest of this fiscal year, but also looking ahead, they would normally be doing the planning for the subsequent fiscal year. And I think what I've heard, and I'm not the point person for this, I just hear things secondhand, is that it's generally looking at level funding through this, which I think is far better than we would have anticipated last spring for this point. So looking good, and I think they are still talking about some additional PFAS related resources as well. So we'll see how it goes, and then the amendments that we'll be looking for are, as always, there are amendments to the budget for various things, from big program changes to small targeted funding for a specific site in somebody's district. So there's a wide range of things that get proposed. Very few of them actually make it through, but we send our thoughts up the line on them. So always exciting. We got one question in from Cole. Maybe we can do that first. Cole, do you want to read your question?
Let me try to find it.
Or I could do a dramatic reading of it.
No, well, basically, it's a question of whether the use of propylene glycol in a closed loop geothermal well, the material itself, if it were to leak in the unlikely event from a closed loop system, would it constitute a reportable quantity or notification? And I have a safety data sheet on the material that shows it to be a non-hazardous, non-toxic material. And when I look at the sort of MassDEP RCRQ OHM list, MOMO list, it lists variables of the propylene glycol with methyl ether and a monomethyl ether, which in my opinion seem to be different constituents. So I'm just looking to provide recommendations to the client in the event that it's a sensitive site, so they're being extremely cautious, and just want to provide a recommendation as to what, if that does. I personally don't think it is, but I wanted to kind of get collective thoughts on that.
Yeah, and the other little piece of information that you included in your email was DEP does have guidance on these systems, in which the guidance, well, we meaning our Bureau of Resource Protection, not waste site cleanup, but we had input into that. Talked about another fluid that could be used is ethanol mixture, and it does specifically talk about the reportable quantity for ethanol.
Correct. Yep.
And kind of throw up a flag for that. So Liz, you want to take this, or shall I? You're muted. You heard Liz. That's there you go. That's your answer.
Okay.
By take it, do you mean answer it now?
Yeah, or give any thoughts.
I'm sorry, Cole, but I am just seeing this at this moment.
Okay.
So Paul, I think Paul saw it sooner. So Paul, if you have pulled your thoughts together, I'd rather listen to you.
Yeah. well, we'll try this, and then if we feel we need to discuss it anymore. Ethylene, the propylene glycol, ethylene glycols are kind of interesting because we don't have reportable quantities for them, and they are for humans kind of less toxic. Everybody knows though that they do have, if you have a leaking radiator in your driveway, you should wash that stuff off, because it does taste sweet, and it is toxic to dogs and probably other animals as well. It also biodegrades fairly quickly in the environment, and it's also used for things like de-icing airplane wings and kind of large scale uses that result in it getting put in the environment, not surprisingly at some quantities. So I'm not completely sure about this, but kind of the mythology that is in my head going back over the years is that there were decisions along the way specifically not to include reportable quantities for these common antifreeze materials, because they biodegrade very quickly in the environment, and because of their relatively low human toxicity, and because of their common uses, so that having reportable quantities would set up a situation where we would get a lot of notifications for something that would not play out in any actual remediation or long-term effects to the environment. So that's my memories of kind of the issues that have come up with the glycols over the years, and decisions not to incorporate, not to have reportable quantities for them. So and I think that's why in the guidance that you see from the drinking water program from BRP, that it does talk specifically about the alcohol related reportable quantity, but doesn't say anything about the glycols, because there isn't an RQ for those. So I would say tentatively, pending further internal DEP discussions, when somebody points out something wrong with my logic here, there isn't a reportable quantity. The ones that you have for the ethers that you identified, the ethers are applicable to different. They are different chemicals that have different properties, and not to propylene or ethylene glycols, and that. So there wouldn't be a reportable quantity, a notification due to an exceedance of a reportable quantity. If it, there are other things that might trigger it if it's in an area where, for example, it then went from there into a pond and in fact had some adverse effect, a fish kill or something like that, that would be notifiable as a frank effect, environmental effect. But I don't believe, based on this reasoning, that there would be a reporting requirement for that leaking.
Oh, isn't ethylene glycol very different from propylene glycol? The ethylene glycol is what you usually find in a car radiator, and propylene is used around foodstuffs.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think.
Well, I was going to say, I kind of agree with your interpretation, but I, when I'm offering, advice or recommendations, I always like to, get some feedback on that before I stick my neck out. And this is hypothetically, it hasn't released, hasn't even been built yet, the system, but they're just very sensitive perception wise.
Well, and as a kind of, it depends. You said it was in a sensitive area. I would take into account what that means. Is it
I mean sensitive, like politically charged, like so.
Oh, that kind of sensitive. Oh,
yes.
I was thinking, right, in a zone 1 of a public water supply.
Oh, no.
In a ACEC or something.
Would it be subject to 370 where even though it's not a release that requires notification, or is it just not a release because it's not an OHM?
Well, I think if it had an effect in the environment, then I think it would be considered hazardous material due to the environmental toxicities. So you'd want to look at that specifically, but I think there was just a conscious decision not to include it in the reportable quantities, even though it would probably, I'm going to say probably qualify as a hazardous material. So yes, you're right that if there was a leak and it caused fish kill, that would be notifiable. If there was a leak and it did get it did pose a risk, the 40.0370 clause, then something might have to be done about it. But again, taking into account that once it hits the aerobic environment, I think it would biodegrade pretty quickly.
Thank you.
Paul and Liz, do you think it would be helpful if we followed up on this? Like if we treat this as like a question submitted to the official question line, we could draft.
Yeah, actually, I would not be surprised, Liz. You might have some memory of this. I wouldn't be surprised if there's already a question in the Q&A.
Yeah. In fact, I think Matt Hackman had questions about ethylene glycol.
Yeah.
If Matt would only show up, he could tell us what we told him before. But yeah, we'll do that. Nicole, would you like it if we just gave you a BWSC regulations response to that?
That'd be fine.
Okay.
Or it could be informal too. I mean,
Okay.
like I said, it's however you best wanted to just appreciate it.
Okay.
Any off-the-cuff questions? Anything weighing on your minds that it would be environmental related? I suppose anything else that might be weighing on your minds? No, going to be quiet today.
Other than how's life in Nevada this morning?
Nevada, yeah.
Or Arizona for that matter.
Nevada has 28 voters. They should be able to count them.
Trouble is only 2 of them can count, Gerard.
Oh, no.
Ooh.
Ooh.
Well, I had seen some. Oh, never mind. I'm not going to go there. Yeah, I'd hate to send you back to poll watching. So good if you could come up with some environmental issue to talk about. I mean, what comes out of these elections? I mean, it will be interesting to see kind of either way the kind of the direction that environmental policies will go, and EPA in particular. I think from the last 4 years, from a Superfund kind of waste site cleanup centric perspective, I think we are probably an area within EPA that has been less affected by it, because I think the cleanup programs in general are relatively non-controversial in that cleaning up contamination that's in the environment is always a good thing, and reusing properties, cleaning up so they can be reused and redeveloped is a good thing, regardless of your viewpoint. So I think hopefully we'll be fairly stable going ahead, regardless of what happens. But it would be interesting. If I were an EPA employee, I would be a lot more nervous than I am as a DEP employee. I am glad I work at MassDEP. Is my bottom line conclusion in all of this.
We're glad you work it.
Yeah, it's the, if you look at the, what's going on with the new discharges, air discharges and things like that, that's where we're going to see some major changes and not in a good way.
We'll see.
The lower courts seem to be supporting the good environmental stuff, but once it gets to the upper courts, I mean, God knows what's going to happen now.
Yeah, it is fascinating reading the kind of the legal aspects of this. You know, Luke has a great job in all of in our work. It really is. My oldest son has kind of expressed interest in going into the law, and it is a fascinating perspective. We work on the technical side of things, but having to kind of keep in mind how it translates to the legal requirements and writing it and developing it in ways that pass muster through the legal system is something you always have to keep in mind. And I keep telling him that he has a good background in science and math and technical stuff, that he would be a great lawyer to be able to understand what the engineers and the scientists are telling him, and then turn it into law. Unfortunately, all of our relatives who are lawyers keep telling him, no, you don't want to do that. You don't want to go to law school.
Well, it's certainly true that a lot of, I mean, if you are a lawyer, a lot of the environmental field is interesting, in part because just a lot of major administrative law concepts tend to get litigated in an environmental context. So it's interesting for two reasons. If you're interested in the environment, it's great, but if you're interested in just the development of administrative law in the United States, it's a great place to be as well. But I remember in the 90s when I was in law school, environmental law seemed like a very stable field. All the major acts had been passed, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act. There were some disputes, obviously, but it's a very different world now, a much more unstable world.
And that's more interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, but not in a good way, Paul.
No. But if it doesn't, if things don't kill you, it makes you stronger. It will come out of it, on the other side, either dead or stronger, with better laws, better rules, and all of that. So always trying to be optimistic about it.
Oh yeah, it's fun to watch.
and all of you are looking so bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and optimistic and cheerful. I'm trying to find a bright side to this. But yeah. I don't know. Somebody save me from myself here.
And we can talk about question 1 if you want to divert. That passed by a landslide.
That was my favorite.
Yeah,
I couldn't understand it.
We have,
Joel, you'd appreciate this. We were talking in the 21J meeting about it, and I always, and Ed Rachins and I assumed that whatever Tom Porter says would be a good way to think about it. And we thought for 100% certainty that he would be in favor of it. And he said he was against it, which was, yeah. He said,
I would have put up I'm going to put up a little red
First,
flag
look-
here. We have to be careful about discussing political
Okay,
these
sorry.
Yeah.
ballot questions. Sorry about that.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So we'll take that comment as a personal comment in your personal
Okay, sorry
capacity.
about that, but
And-
it was very interesting. It was an interesting
Sorry.
conversation.
Well, why is that political? That seems to be,
Ballot questions are treated as political in certain contexts. I mean, I'd have to review the rule, but there are some red flags around ballot questions. The way government employees can talk about ballot questions.
Okay. My bad.
Sorry.
Didn't censor
I'm
it.
always.
I'll go back to my whole.
Although technically, Luke, it's no longer a ballot question. It's
you
the
go.
law.
Yeah.
And we do have the ability to talk about existing law.
I think it's not actually. I think it's a recommendation. I think ultimately the legislature has to act. But anyway, let's stop. I don't want to go down that.
Okay.
And Luke can't help himself because he is our ethics go-to person in the department. So he's compelled to say something.
Which makes me extra unpopular with my client from time to time. So that's part of the fun of being a lawyer at DEP and to that.
Yeah. No, we appreciate it. And
I was going to say, since I'm not a government employee, I can talk about that question. My wife was all for question 1 until Tesla came out against it. And she's such a Tesla fangirl that she totally flipped her vote.
Yeah.
does she belong to the Tesla fangirl club?
She does, yes. She's met the Facebook page. She has drank the Kool-Aid.
Right.
Well, aren't they against it because they don't want anybody fixing their cars except them?
Yeah.
Wasn't that the point?
I tried to point that out to her, and yeah, that's.
There were several small garages who were in the commercials saying, we already have right to repair and we don't need it. And that's just not true, because then we have it up to a point right now, but with this ballot question, it gets you more of the data that you need to repair a car. I mean, I have a link to this computer that I can plug all my cars into, and I can diagnose what my problems are. If the car makers had their way, they wouldn't make that software so available.
I purchased that software. I think it's called Fixit or something like that. Is that what you're referring to?
Well, it's called OBD Tool is the one that I have. I've been using it for about 20 years. And I've gotten various upgrades because as the cars get newer, the links weren't working. I had to get a new link and I had to get new software, but it works great. It tells you someone's ore is misfiring, it's unbelievable the level to which you can get the data.
Yeah, it's pretty much an app, isn't it, on your phone that you can, or on your computer? Or
Yeah, with a special cable that goes to the car.
cool.
Well, I have a question that could rescue us and put us back.
Thank you,
into the
Marilyn.
environmental. So I know we've pulled that rock up the hill of 1,4-dioxane, and then we've sort of drowned in the reservoir of PFAS now. But are there any senses of what's the next emerging contaminant or contaminants that might brighten our horizons? I mean, is it microplastics? Do folks have an opinion on, since we're all sick of oversaturation from PFAS, what's the next distraction, do you think?
propylene glycol.
Thank you, Cole.
Yeah, no, let's hope not.
Yes, formerly thought to not be toxic.
Yeah. Yeah,
It's sort of like glyphosate, where, here, use this one, right?
Yeah. Nanoparticles, nanoplastics, certainly might be an environmental issue, but I'm not seeing them as like a wayside cleanup issue so far. I don't know what, there have always been a list of things are, I think it may still be on our website. The Office of Research and Standards had a list of chemicals that they were keeping an eye on as emerging contaminants, and PFAS had been on that for a while, 1,4-dioxane. Trying to remember what else might have been on it. There are a bunch of things that had been, people do a lot of studies about what's coming out of like wastewater treatment plants, and the things that are in consumer use that somehow then get into the environment. So, there had been a lot of talk years ago about the various estrogen-like chemicals that would come out of treatment plants and get into the environment, and the effects that they would have on the development of frogs and neighboring wetlands and that sort of thing. But as far as kind of industrial use chemicals that might be more in our line, I don't know. I'd have to go back and look at that list. So I mentioned that the PFAS list will grow. Yeah, the PFAS list will grow, but at some point, I think it's going to be like PCBs and dioxins, and you rarely, if you can treat PCBs as a family and deal with them as a family and not get into the individual ones, then you do. And I think PFAS will end up being in that same category. We'll talk about PFAS, but not necessarily get into all of the individual ones. At least I hope not, because I don't have the time or patience to get into the hundreds of different PFAS chemicals and deal with them each individually.
I think I just pasted the link to that ORS website. I don't know. I'm never very good at putting things in chat.
Yeah, I'm not seeing it.
Oh, no? Okay.
No.
I don't think I've sent it.
Well, then we won't see it.
I'll figure it out. But nanoparticles are on there, cyanobacteria.
Yeah.
Perchlorate is still on there. 1,4-dioxane, PFAS.
Yeah, so we've gotten to the ones that look more like traditional waste site cleanup issues: perchlorate, 1,4-dioxane, PFAS. The cyanobacteria certainly will be a problem, but waste site cleanup isn't going to be doing much about that. Hopefully.
Is there anyone here with a background in materials science who sort of knows what the cutting edge materials scientists are doing, developing in their test tubes? No.
Yeah.
Guess that's a no.
So good. We'll be done with it. After we deal with PFAS, that will be the end. Will be 1,4-dioxane, cyanobacteria, nanoparticles, perchlorate. When was this last updated?
Not for a while. I think there was, I don't know if they still have that active group. I remember Carol Rowan West
Yeah.
even had some type of steering committee on this.
Oh, the polybrominated diphenyl ethers, ethers. There you go. That will be the next one. The PBDEs.
What are those found in?
Those are I believe those are the chemicals that are put into fabrics and your baby clothing and stuff as anti
The fire retardant.
fire retardants. Yeah,
Yeah.
That's the word I was looking for. So you could imagine, much like PFAS compounds, that they are in a lot of consumer products, and you might see them coming out of things like landfills and wastewater treatment plants and the like, and places where they manufacture those materials.
I heard an interesting talk on toxoplasms, the little critters that give you toxoplasmosis that are most commonly found in cat shit, which is why pregnant women shouldn't be cleaning out litter boxes.
Mm-hmm.
They get in and alter your brain. The meanest thing is the carrier is mice, and it gets in the the mouse brain, and it makes the mouse, instead of running away from, avoiding the scent of cat urine, it makes it be attracted to it. So it actually has the mouse more attracted to cats, which of course puts them in the more likely to be caught by cats and passed on.
Huh.
I have to laugh. I thought you were referring to ketchup at first. I'm like,
No, no,
how did we get from mice to ketchup?
no, just regular cats.
So,
Like a very cruel evolutionary trick.
yeah,
Mm.
that's good. That is kind of interesting
Yeah.
from an evolutionary point of view. Bad for the mice, good for the cats.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Mm.
Well, I think the polybrominated stuff is our best guess for the next class of emerging contaminants that we would have to deal with. But if you have cats or if you have mice, then maybe those toxic compounds would be something else to keep in mind.
Yeah.
So thank you, Marilyn. That distracted us from the politics and things for some period of time. Anybody else? For something environmentally related? Okay, well, if not, then we can go off until next week. We probably should set a topic for next week. If only to guide our non-environmental discussions.
Yeah. I suppose Luke doesn't want us talking about the election results at that point.
Yeah, probably not.
You could talk about environmental policies.
There you go.
Yeah.
We won't have the election results by then.
We can. You can
If-
talk about whatever you want. We can talk about environmental policies.
If there may be a
Yeah.
shift in environmental policies on the horizon starting next week. If so, we might want to talk about those. Particularly, I would be interested in seeing any shifts in the federal government's approach to PFAS that might come up. As we're rolling out the MCL and applying it, at sites, it would be good to see the federal government kind of pick it up and approach things kind of in a similar manner that Massachusetts and a bunch of other states are. So
Paul, we one of our guys put together a flow chart based on the regulations that came out at the end of October, I guess, for the water supply, and it makes the MCP look like a clear, nice, easy work of art. Really appreciate
which it is.
Which it is, but you look at that and it's just bizarre. So it made me appreciate working with the MCP, which is
So the DEP drinking water regulations, you mean?
yes, that is what I mean.
Well, the drinking water program, I dabble in it periodically and have to learn it, and it's not as straightforward as one would think. I mean, first you have so many different categories of regulated types of drinking water supplies. Each of the chemicals that are being regulated have different reasons why they're regulated and might have different compliance schedules and requirements for testing. And then there are the waivers that you can get. So I could imagine a great flow chart because it is potentially a complicated system, but once you know kind of where, if you are a water supplier and you know kind of what category you fit in, then I think that simplifies a lot, and you can kind of ignore the rest of it. So if you are a non-transient community water supplier that serves X number of people, then I think that it becomes clearer kind of what are the requirements that apply to you, as long as you can shut out all the other stuff that's in there that applies to other people and other systems. So I think it's when you try to look at it as a whole and try to understand it all that it becomes more complicated. But I hope for an individual water supplier trying to figure out, okay, what applies to me, I think you get a much simpler flow chart for that. At least I hope so.
I hope that's right. I'll send you the flow chart so you can have a look at it.
Oh, I love flow charts. Yes.
I know you do.
So actually, yeah. Okay. So next week, thank you, Larry. Next week, after we finish whatever pressing environmental waste site cleanup related issues we want to talk about and send in your questions or bring them to us, it's a little bit too early to talk about Thanksgiving. So how about we bring our favorite flow chart? It doesn't have to be environmental related. There are some great flow charts out there. Did you ever read Wired magazine back when they printed it? Do they still print it? They used to have, the back page for a while used to always be a flow chart, a complicated flow chart to clarify something rather, or go through a thought process. That was my favorite part of the magazine.
They do still print it. I'm gonna go grab mine now and look at them because I haven't looked at them in a long time.
Yeah, I think it was, the inside of the back cover, the last page, I think usually had those flow charts. So, there are lots of flow charts out there covering a lot of different things. So, find your favorite or find an interesting one. A flow chart for the strangest thought process that you never thought there would be a flow chart for. And bring that next week. That would be the highlight of my week.
Sounds like a fair